It is Brent Axe, and we are live here on the Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page. A thriller at the Carrier Dome, some referees to tear apart, and Syracuse takes care of business over Wake Forest, getting one by the hair on their chinny chin. A 75-73 win for the Orange. Great to be back with you here. We've had a week off. Been a while since we've done this here on Facebook Live, but we are back and we are here thanks to our friends at Krause Health. So you guys get in the comments section, do your thing. I'll respond to you guys coming up here shortly. A lot to go over for the Orange in this one. They got the win, and that's what's going to matter. But we got a few things to get off our chest here, particularly about the horrid officiating in this game. And it's something I think the ACC has really got to look into. Whether it was Teddy TV down the stretch of the Duke, North Carolina game, the crew in this game that took over, unnecessary calls, and put an unnecessary stain on what was a very interesting game. And it's not just the officiating, by the way. Syracuse had a 16-point lead in this game that they let whittle down. They got absolutely crushed on the boards in the second half by Wake Forest, and that's something that we have to discuss. This is a Syracuse team that went to sleep for a while against the worst team in the ACC and certainly had their own faults in this one. But the officiating crew of, and I've got the names right here, Clarence Armstrong, Tony Henderson, Roger Ayers. Roger Ayers, actually usually pretty good official in the ACC. I have a good friend of mine. We'll give him a shout out, Brian Harrison. You may know Brian from the Orange 44 blog, and he's very active on Twitter, one of the more active Syracuse fans on Twitter. He's an official and is pretty good at knowing the good officials, the bad officials, what to kind of anticipate from officials in this game. And he said before the game, and I had no reason not to believe him, that Roger Ayers is one of the better officials in the ACC. He certainly was not tonight, and neither was this crew. We will certainly get to that. But how about Bryson Goodine? The unlikely combo of Jesse Edwards, who's got to play the last 7-8 minutes of this game because Merrick Dolzaj fouls out, which that fifth foul we'll get into is absolute garbage. Barama Sidibe fouled out very early in the second half of this game. And Quincy Guerrier, who actually, that's the downside to how Quincy played tonight. He actually had a pretty good game otherwise. As we dig into the stats here and tell you what happened out there, Buddy Boeheim led the way for Syracuse in this one. He had 23 points. He had 4 steals on the night, made a key defensive play down the stretch for the Orange. He goes 5 of 9 from three-point range. Elijah Hughes with 20 points tonight, 8 rebounds on the night, 4 block shots on the night. What a defender he is becoming. I think he's showing off to NBA scouts that are at these games that he could play one-on-one defense, not one of these zone guys that won't be able to play D at the next level. But Hughes steps up for Syracuse. Quincy Guerrier, we mentioned it, 13 points, 3 offensive rebounds. Now, the officiating didn't really apply to him in terms of how bad it was. It was more on him. And this is something that Jim Boeheim said after the press conference last week, that Quincy Guerrier is somebody that the more minutes he plays, and he had to play 15 minutes in this game and would have played much longer had he not fouled out, the more he plays, the more foul trouble he gets into. So Quincy, who was aggressive under the basket, attacked some rebounds, some putbacks. He was great at the free throw line tonight, 7 of 8 of the night at the free throw line. He still has to learn positioning. He still has to know when to reach for the basketball. He still has a lot to learn on the defensive end, but really helped Syracuse tonight. As we mentioned, Barama played 15 minutes, doesn't even seem like that, but did virtually nothing out there other than make fouls. He had a couple of block shots, a couple of defensive plays, but got into foul trouble, and that really killed him. We mentioned Dolzaj, 7 points, 7 rebounds, fouled out. Didn't have the opportunity to do more, was 1 of 7 shooting the ball. He struggled a bit on the offensive end a little bit. He plays 34 minutes on the night. Howard Washington got a little bit of run out there today. We mentioned Jesse Edwards had to play 10 minutes in this game with the foul trouble. And Syracuse found a way, despite the officiating and despite this, okay, we can't leave this out of the mix here. In the second half of this basketball game, Syracuse got out-rebounded by Wake Forest 25-10. Now, some of that has to do with their bigger bodies falling out. Sidibe goes out. Merrick Dolzaj goes out, right? Jesse Edwards actually made some key rebounds down the stretch, but this was even when some of those big guys were in there. So Syracuse got pounded on the glass. Overall, in this game, Syracuse shoots 22 of 56. That's 39%. Wake was not too far behind. The shooting numbers were pretty even throughout the game. They were 23 of 61. That's 37%. Syracuse was 7 of 21 from three-point range. Wake was 6 of 27 from three-point range. So the overall rebounding numbers tilt towards Wake Forest, 44 to 34 in this one. And Syracuse assisted 11 of their buckets. Wake Forest with 15 assists on the night. Syracuse with 11 turnovers. Wake with 15 turnovers on the night. Points off turnovers tilt towards Wake Forest, 20 to 19. Points in the paint tilt towards Syracuse, 24 to 22. So that is the story numbers-wise. Okay, the officials. That fifth foul on Marek Dolezaj was absolute garbage. First of all, he wasn't out of bounds. Thanks to Eric Columbia from Spectrum, who sent me a video on Twitter. And if you follow me on Twitter, Brent Axe Media, you can see it. Dolezaj's not out of bounds. The official is standing right over him, right there. I'm not sure which official that was, honestly, but he is literally right over him, calls him out of bounds, wasn't out of bounds. Dolezaj gets up. Now, you can't do this. You can't show up the ref. Dolezaj, out of frustration, points at the scoreboard as if to say, watch the replay, I'm not out of bounds. Gets called for a technical. Unless Marek Dolezaj said some words I can't repeat here, you don't call that technical, particularly to foul a guy out. That has to be egregious. That has to be, just a blatant, you made me blow this whistle. That was not the case. So it's interesting because earlier in the second half, Dolezaj got hip checked by Johnson from Wake Forest. If it was a hockey game, he would have went to the penalty box. And that didn't get called as a technical, even though Johnson wasn't playing the ball. It was the definition of a flagrant. It was the definition of a technical because he just hip checked him out of the way. That doesn't get called. And I can go over a lot of touch fouls. I can go over a lot of ridiculous non-calls, let alone the calls, and this crew taking over the game. And I hate to see it. And if you follow me here on these chats, if you follow me on Twitter, if you've been listening to my radio show, I am not quick to blame officials. I think it's a cop-out. I think Syracuse fans get on officials too much, frankly. But when it's blatant, when it's clear, it's got to be called out. And the ACC has got to look at this because these officials, whatever punishments happen behind the scenes, we never truly hear about them, needs to happen. This crew was bad. It was bad. And when you've got video evidence of a guy standing right over a player, making that call, I mentioned Teddy TV and some of the bad. Now, look, North Carolina blew it. North Carolina's got to hit their free throws. That's an insane rivalry. So much happens there. But Duke got a lot of favorable calls down the stretch of that game, too, some of which can be aided by replay. So the ACC's got a bit of a problem on its hands with its officials. So I don't want to rant about that all night, but it needed to be said for sure. Good news for Syracuse is they get the win, and now things get really intense for the Orange because they got a quick turnaround Tuesday night against NC State. That will by no means be an easy game for Syracuse. NC State's one of those teams that's kind of hovering there right around Syracuse, middle of the pack in the league. Certainly could come to the Dome Tuesday night and win that game. And that'll be the third of three straight at home. Syracuse lost to Duke. They beat Wake Forest tonight. They get another home game Tuesday night. And then the stretch that's going to decide the season, in my opinion, and just by the numbers, the net rankings, and everything the NCAA selection committee uses to determine who's in and who's out, short of Syracuse winning the ACC tournament or beating Louisville and Florida State and getting in off a weak bubble. Syracuse goes to Florida State on Saturday. They turn around and play Louisville shortly after that. That's going to decide the season. That's going to decide if this team's a true NCAA tournament contender or not. They took care of business in a take-care-of-business game tonight. They've got to do the same Tuesday night against NC State, and then you need big wins. You need quality wins that look good to the committee, that look good in the league. This is a league where if they go 7-2 down the stretch, let's just say for argument's sake, and those two losses are Florida State and Louisville, they're not getting in. They don't have enough quality wins. So as good as Syracuse is playing, as much as they're improving, gunned one out tonight with Jesse Edwards and Bryson Goodine having to scrape plays together, fighting through three guys fouling out. Jim Boeheim mentioning at his press conference how proud he was of this team, and he should be. They got one out tonight for sure. They need those wins, and they have to be playing their best going into those two, both on the road, by the way. If they don't win those two, I don't think they make the tournament, again, short of a really deep run in the ACC tournament, a weird bubble that bounces them in, or So the college basketball has been weird this year. So I don't want to say anything definitive here, but we're starting to come down the stretch where you can kind of see the clear path of where Syracuse has to be tournament-wise. But they're in the conversation. They're staying in that conversation by the hair on their chinny chin chin. I wrote a column last week about how defense is not what is going to get Syracuse there. This is not a typical Syracuse lean on its 2-3 zone defensive team. We saw that in the second half. As bad as the officiating was, Syracuse can't make stops. They're just not a good defensive team. They made some good plays on defense, don't get me wrong. Elijah Hughes with the blocks. We mentioned Buddy Steels. They made some key plays when they needed to. Jesse Edwards knocking the play away that allowed a couple breakaways. So they made some plays, some scrappy plays, some rebounds. But this is just not a team that can consistently get stops. It's going to live and die by its offense. It's going to live and die by not necessarily the three-point shooting as well. Buddy Boeheim got into the paint a lot in the second half. Quincy Guerrier, we mentioned, was great in the paint before he got into foul trouble. Hughes made his way into the paint tonight with just enough threes from Buddy, but it's not a team that's going to get in the tournament or be in the conversation for the tournament based on its defense. That's just not that team. All right, let's hop in the comments, see what you guys are saying here. Yeah, a lot of comments about the officials, how Johnson hip checked Buddy Boeheim. That didn't get called, and it was brutal. I really hate to see when officials think we're there to watch them when they take over a basketball game. Sometimes refs do have to step in and regulate games and balance out games. And, the Duke game, Syracuse got to the free throw line 37 times. That was an evenly called game. But refs just have their egos are out of control in college basketball. I'm sorry. I've just seen too many games this year that have been awful in terms of the officiating. There's too much to remember. There's too much to regulating. They're trying to regulate, technical fouls in terms of celebrations. And like the NCAA is already a disaster in a lot of different ways, but they're officiating. There's a lot of good officials out there. I hate to just pick on some guys. There's some good officials out there. Our guy, Mr. Driscoll, locally here, Patty Driscoll, is a great official, I think. And there's some good officials out there. So I don't want to just dump on all those guys, but I've watched too many games with just too much inconsistency this year. Too much refs just taking over the game, short of Teddy TV, who's just in a category on his own there. So I'm sorry, I keep ranting about that, but it's frustrating when refs take over games that they don't really have to. And then they call Brent Axe out of bounds. The guy's right there. It's right there. How do you not see that? No wonder Marek Dolce said, hey, see that big scoreboard up there? Why don't you check that thing out? All right. Anthony's saying James Arthur Boeheim been fighting the refs since 1976 for sure. Look, sometimes that can work when you get in their ear a little bit, make them aware of things, and tilt the calls your way. It does that in football a lot. Didn't work in the Super Bowl, but Kyle Shanahan, every coach in the NFL does it to one extent, but Kyle Shanahan will literally tell the official what call he's missing. And a good percentage of the time he's right. NFL films, it teaches you things. But I like this comment from Dave, though. Officiating was bad, but the bigs need to stop following 75 feet from the basket. This is a great point. Okay, Guerrier, we mentioned, who's just learning about defense, has to get to the point where he's smarter. Brahma Sidibe just continues to make dumb fouls, and that had nothing to do with officiating. This is a player who, yes, this is his first fully healthy year. He's a little bit younger. I know what his class status is in terms of where he is at Syracuse, but this is his first fully healthy season. But he's not getting better defensively. He's not learning out there. And you can just bank on him getting 4 fouls at least on the edge of 5. But the last few games, it's happened really early. Like we're talking 16, 15 minutes left in the game, and he's got to come out. And when his primary backup there to anchor things when he's out is Quincy Guerrier, who also is struggling in that department, that's not good. Now, Dolce fouled out tonight. We mentioned the bogus call, but even Dolce is picking up some fouls here and there. These guys have to be careful about positioning, reaching in, and when to really go for it versus just kind of putting your arms up and being somebody in the way. They've really got to budget their fouls a lot better. Officiating aside, that's a good point. Let's see. Dan mentioned the 5th foul on Quincy was a joke. I can't disagree with you there. I like what Brian has to say here. When Quincy learns, he'll be good, but not till next year. Yeah, it's pretty much defense now because I think he's much better around the basket. I think he took advantage, frankly, of a Wake Forest defense that's not the best. Had space, could be patient, but he had a couple of really aggressive possessions where he was just offensive rebounds, really fighting for it, good positioning inside, showing what he can be, showing a guy who is physical, but wasn't used to playing bigger players until getting to the ACC. Next year, I think we're going to see a huge breakout season from Quincy for now. But there's some things he's got to be ready to do for now. As I just said, Barama Sidibe just is getting in too much foul trouble. And for a player who is at the level he's at, he should be better. One guy I did not mention yet, and Rob mentions it here, Joe Girard. Girard had a bad game. There's just no way around it. I'm sorry if I skipped over Joe's stats earlier. Joe tonight was, let's just put it out there, let's see, 3 of 12. He was 1 of 6 from three-point range, 7 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. I can't believe he only had 3 turnovers. It seemed like 13 the way he was playing. His shot selection was terrible in this game. And this is a freshman who the minutes are catching up to him, and the games and the defenses are catching up to him. Now, Joe Girard played a lot of basketball at Glens Falls and had to do everything for that team. What we're seeing now is that Joe's not, on pace to keep this up as a point guard at the college level. It's very interesting. I'm sure a lot of you saw the huge recruiting news for Syracuse. 5-star, number 1 rated point guard in the class of 22, D.R. Johnson, committed to Syracuse this week. Now, it's a question if he's going to hold that commitment. If the NBA's one and done rule gets lifted, which it's on track to be in 2023, I think they're saying at this point, then he might rethink that decision. Even so, you get a year out of him in that case. He says, our Mike Waters interviewed him, said he's committed. He will think about it if the NBA's one and done rule changes, and he doesn't have to do 1 year at college. But he says if he goes to college, he's committed to Syracuse, and he wants to bring other players with him. He said Syracuse basketball is back when he committed this week. He's going to bring other players with him. There's another 5-star player that committed to visit Syracuse for the North Carolina game coming up in a couple of weeks. So the Girard, I like in a lot of ways. I've been very complimentary of Joe. I like his grit, his toughness. He can't shoot the 3. I think he's going to develop into a great player. But is he a point guard at this level? That's still a valid question. He did a little bit of everything in high school. Is he a point guard, game in and game out at this level? Howard Washington Jr. should have played more, should have been in for him because I can't say that. Shot selection, that's a tongue twister, was bad. It was bad tonight. When you don't have your shot, you can't keep firing those things up. You got to distribute, and you got to be more in the background. I know Joe's used to being aggressive. Jim Boeheim's telling him to shoot. But the fact that Howard Washington Jr. only played 3 minutes with the way that Joe was struggling tonight, I did not agree with that. Good stat here from Ben, my man Ben Burrows behind the scenes. Per KenPom, Guerrier is averaging 5.5 fouls per 40 minutes, and Sidibe's averaging 7. Yeah, that's bad. That's really bad. So that's something that they've definitely got to work on. And it's not like they're not telling these guys. It's one thing with Guerrier as a freshman. Barama's got to know better. Barama's definitely got to know better. Lee, I agree with you. Why is Washington glued to the bench? You shouldn't be. Shouldn't be. When your freshman is struggling like that, you got to put in a guy who runs the point. David mentioned, too, and it's a good point, David, that they get Jalen Carey back next year as the lead guard, and they get Joe off the ball. Buddy's still going to be around, so that's going to be an interesting mix at guard. And then, as we mentioned, D.R. Johnson comes in after that. Neil says, Brent, I think if we lost in 13-10, 6-6, they'd be done. As far as the big dance is concerned, this was a really big win. It absolutely was, because there's certain ACC games left on the slate I think you can, for lack of a better term, you can get away with losing. This was not one of them. This was not even close to being one of those games, but NC State might fall in that category. You need Louisville. To me, I think you got to beat Louisville and Florida State to get in the tournament. That's just me. The bubble's weird this year. Maybe one of those will be enough. But I think you got to beat both of them. But you lose this game, and you are in a deep, dark hole for sure. What's up, Daryl? Good to see you, buddy. Saying, Brent, thank you. Our bigs aren't good at staying out of foul trouble. Pardon me. ACC officials are terrible. One game at a time for this team. That's what it is, Daryl. It's the old cliche, but it is one game at a time for this team. And they got more of a fight in their hands than maybe they thought in this one. But welcome to the ACC, friends. It is just something different every night. Greg says they should put Joe at the 2. A good point was made earlier when Jalen Carey comes back. Maybe that allows that. Buddy didn't go anywhere, and he's going to play the 2 as well. But I think Joe is starting to show he's just not a point guard at this level. But he's got to be one now, because mixing in with a little bit more of Howard, who David points out here, as I was just going to mention, he's not a scoring threat, which is the balance there. Howard's just kind of the facilitator. Joe can score. If Joe gets hot, he can hit that three-point shot. He can get in the paint. He can't be a scorer, but a night like tonight shows you that when he just doesn't have it, he just doesn't have it. Steven says he'd be shocked if Carey comes back next year. I think he is coming back next year. Now, I'm wondering what Jalen's thinking with the commitment they got, because D.R. Johnson's going to play. I mean, that's a number one rated point guard in his class. That's a guy who I think, I saw Chris Carlson tweet this, is by measure of recruiting rankings, the highest recruit Syracuse has gotten a commitment from since Carmelo Anthony. And we're talking about a guy who might exercise the one and done rule if it goes away. Let me reverse that. We'll just skip college altogether if the one and done rule gets reversed, and as it's going to be. It's not a matter of if, it's when. It's going to happen. But when the NBA goes through with it is a different question. So, I mean, that guy's going to play. So I do think Jalen Carey comes back next year, but I don't think anybody would be stunned if he left eventually, considering what's around him and who's coming in. John says Buddy has to be on the floor all 40 minutes. He's too valuable. Dan saying we have so many guards who are not leaving. Christian says the fouls are usually not in the flow of the game and can be attributed to being tired. Honestly, I think that's overrated, Christian, and I agree with Jim Boeheim on this. I think these guys are in shape. There's enough timeouts that it's not to say there's not some kind of fatigue. I mean, even the most highly tuned, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kid's going to get tired in the course of a game like this. But in terms of not going deeper on the bench, I mean, this game doesn't really tell that tale that we usually tell, because it was Bryson Goodine that made the play at the end, and it was Jesse Edwards that knocked the ball over to him. So maybe there's a case to be made for getting these guys out there, but usually they wouldn't be in these clutch situations unless you had an extreme situation. That's what we had tonight. You had three guys foul out, all with significant time on the clock. Patrick says, hard for me to second-guess coach's decision on how to run this team, but when you're up by 16 and Gerard chucks it early in the second half, he should have been pulled. Completely agree with you, Patrick. I said that in our live chat as well on syracuse.com, that costs Syracuse. So you got to know when your young guard is rattled, needs to be pulled. And to Boeheim's credit, you guys think, and I've seen these comments elsewhere, that Boeheim has given favoritism to Joe Girard. Not the case tonight. He got the riot act from Boeheim a few different times in this one. So, not to say there aren't players that do get that special treatment. I don't think I ever saw Jim Boeheim yell at Jerry McNamara back in the day. There are players that are coached and treated differently, but Girard, he got the business plenty of times tonight for sure. Interesting dynamic for Carey is Kadari Richmond coming in for 2020, 6'5" point guard. That's up to a top 100 recruit now, as Ben notes there. Thank you, sir. Greg saying, do they have to play Sidibe? We saw Jesse Edwards really make some plays tonight, didn't we? He's a freshman. He's a little on the skinny side. He's certainly more offensively skilled than Barama at this point, but other than loyalty, what does he give you? He just gets into foul trouble game in and game out. Barama's he's a take-up space guy. He really is. If there was a commanding knocking on the door player to get him out of there, then I say you put him in. But we're not quite there yet. Jesse's just not ready to be that guy at this point. So you kind of have to put up with Barama, but I see why you would say that. I really do. I mean, guy gets into foul trouble before you have that first snack watching the game. Blake says Syracuse up 16, settled for too many bad quick shots, and a lot of those were Girard, unfortunately, in this game. Does Boeheim listen to this chat? I highly doubt that Boeheim listens to this chat, knowing that Jim Boeheim's, let's say, how allergic he is to getting on the internet. But I'm sure people listen for him. But if Coach Boeheim is here on a Saturday night after a win at 11 o'clock in our live chat, welcome aboard, Coach. We're always great to have you here. If I was Jim Boeheim, I'd be doing many other things besides that. But we're appreciative of anybody who comes by. Coach, otherwise, you're always welcome here. We're here after every game, by the way. doing the thing. All right, what do you say we end it there for tonight? I want to remind you that if you can't be here live, Coach Boeheim and others, that we do put this up in two different ways so you can watch it or listen to it when you want. One is we put this on YouTube. It is up on the Syracuse Orange Sports page, and we put it up right afterwards here. We'll put it up. It'll be up shortly, so you can watch it on demand when you want if you can't be here live for the chat afterwards. We also make this a podcast. So please subscribe to syracuse.com podcasts. If it's iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, you'll find it. Just search syracuse.com podcast. You'll get the podcast of my game recaps, the Syracuse sports podcast that I do, the Syracuse football podcast with Stephen Bailey. He had a great conversation with Syracuse's new defensive coordinator, Tony White, this week. So you get a lot of different podcasts on one feed if you subscribe to syracuse.com podcasts, including our game recaps here. Thanks to Krause Health. Thanks to my man Ben behind the scenes. Thanks to you for coming by. As always, we'll be right back here Tuesday night after the Orange take on NC State. For tonight, overcoming some bad officiating, 3 players falling out, and some tension and some tight times down the stretch. Syracuse pulls off a win over Wake Forest tonight, 75-73. We'll talk to you again Tuesday.